Ajers. Aiden Ajers Bernero was born on November 19th of 2005. And like many other players on this list, he played one of the first ever official Fortnite tournaments, the Share the Love Cup. He managed to get his first ever earnings a few weeks later during the World Cup qualifiers, where he would earn $675. Although Ajers didn't make it to the World Cup finals, he did continue to play through the next year, making some money here and there, while not being able to make it very far into the rounds of FNCS. However, his placements were good enough to get invited to the FNCS Invitational on May 24th of 2020. However, unlike most players, he didn't get invited. So after making it through all the rounds of qualifiers and getting to the grand finals, it was finally time for Ajers to show off the pro that he is. It was a solos tournament, and out of the top 100 players on the region, he got 86th. And although this wasn't a huge accomplishment, it did make the point that he was a player to be reckoned with, and he also got to take home $400. And although this wasn't the exact placement he wanted, it was just a launch pad for him to move forward, as he would just keep qualifying for FNCSs after this one. The Chapter 2 Season 3 Grand Finals were also solos, and Ajers managed to do better this time, placing 26th out of 100 and earning $1,200. Because of this relatively big success, he was able to attract attention of fellow pros and get himself a good team for the next Grand Finals. Chapter 2 Season 4 Grand Finals were on November 1st of 2020, and Ajers would be joined by fellow rising pros Degen and the more proven Sen Animal. The trio would finish a disappointing 18th place and decided to make a change in the team. Ajers would stick together with Degen, but they would drop Animal and pick up Skittles. This turned out to be a great choice because the team jumped up to 6th place during Chapter 2 Season 5. Then, in the following season of Chapter 2 Season 6 FNCS, they would place 6th once again. After that, they would get 7th during Season 7 and 9th during Season 8. Although these weren't incredible, they were consistent, and it showed that this trio was a force to be reckoned with going into the 2021 Grand Royale on November 21st of 2021. Here, Ajers decided to switch things up and play with a new trio. He had attracted the attention of a really good player named Saf, who was huge during the World Cup era, and Kanata, who we all know is one of the Fortnite GOATs. Ultimately, the trio would place 8th and take home $10,000. And although this placement was okay, it wasn't exactly what they were looking for. So when Fortnite transitioned from trios to duos going into 2022, Ajers would find himself a completely new teammate. In the first FNCS, Ajers would play with Rise, where they got 16th on NA East. And they decided to split ways after the disappointing performance, where Ajers would then get back together with his old teammate, Kanata. And although they played well as a trio, they did even better as a duo, as they would place 5th during the Chapter 3 Season 2 Grand Finals and the Chapter 3 Season 3 Grand Finals. This was Ajers' best performances yet, but he was still flying relatively under the radar, as he still hadn't gotten an FNCS win. At this point in his career, Ajers still hadn't played in a LAN event, and the 2023 Globals were approaching quickly. So Ajers knew that he would have to try his hardest to get his spot in that coveted FNCS. During Major 1 of that following year, him and his duo would do exactly what they needed, finishing 2nd place in Major 1.
It is time. We know, without a shadow of a doubt, your winners for the FNCS Grand Finals in Major number 3 here in North America are Ajers and Kanata. He's pulled it off. The duo come together and they make the impossible happen. This was their major, and for the first time, Kanata and Ajers will hold that axe of champions high.
This was the best we've seen Ajers play up until this point. And in the Major 2 the following season, they would follow it up with a 6th place, which wasn't too bad, considering this was when they had just switched regions to NA Central, and they had already won the season before, so they weren't too worried. However, Major 3, the final major before the Global Championships, were where Ajers and Kanata wanted to prove that they were a duo to be reckoned with going into the finals. So the duo would go absolutely crazy.
It might have gone crazy, and it went crazy for Ajers and Kanata, the battle for 2nd place.
There it is. The Yamzo and Rise going out a little bit early that game. Ajers, though, we're talking about solo clutches coming out of cold. Ajers surviving until that 2nd place, picking up a couple more eliminations, 5-point difference makes a difference right there between $20,000, picking up 70 grand for Kanata and Ajers. Huge for them.
This win was historic for multiple reasons. Not only was it Kanata and Ajers' first ever FNCS wins, it also qualified them straight to the Global Championships of that year in Copenhagen. Unfortunately, the duo only placed 18th at the LAN, but considering it was all the way in Europe and it was their first ever LAN, it wasn't too bad. Because of these factors, Ajers and Kanata decided to run it back in 2024 for Major 1. However, after they placed 13th in the first major, they decided to call it quits. In Major 2, Ajers would team up with Bugha, where they would place 13th, and then he would play with Rise once again in Major 3 and place 13th again. However, this was just enough to sneak them into the 2024 Global Championship LAN, where him and Rise placed 16th. Once again, this is not as high as Ajers wanted, but it was still better than his Global's performance last year, so he was improving. At this point, Ajers had been flying under the radar with very little recognition for basically 5 years of competitive Fortnite. So, going into 2025, where we switched to trios, Ajers was ready to make his mark on the Fortnite community. He teamed up with Acorn and the previous global champion Pollo, where the three of them would win the first major of this year, getting Ajers his second ever Grand Finals win. There was a lot of skeptical people going into this recent tournament, accusing Ajers of being bad and basically saying that Pollo should be playing with somebody better, but they definitely proved everyone wrong as they beat Peterbot and Cold in getting first place. Unfortunately, however, not everyone on this list would prove their haters wrongs, because next